Imagine a sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut during the late 1920s with manicured lawns, a large family home, and a rotating staff of nearly 20, an early symbol of a life marked by privilege and responsibility. Into this world stepped a baby girl named Ethel Skakel on April 11th, 1928, destined to become a pillar of one of America's most famous dynasties. She was the sixth of 7 children born to coal magnate George Skakel and his devoutly Catholic wife, Anne Branagh. Although she entered the world in Chicago, Illinois, her parents soon took advantage of booming business fortunes and established themselves in a lavish Connecticut environment. That estate, with all its trappings of affluence, would form the backdrop of Ethel's earliest memories, where her father's success provided everything she needed to explore an adventurous, tomboyish spirit, and eventually to cross paths with a political clan that would forever shape her destiny. Growing up, Ethel occupied a space somewhere between the expected femininity of a wealthy young lady and the more carefree pursuit of outdoor exploits that spoke to her sense of independence. With 6 siblings around her, she formed a tight bond, particularly with those close to her own age. She could be found skiing during snowy winters, sailing whenever they visited waterside retreats, and riding horses across the grounds of the family estate. This love of physical activities instilled in her a certain boldness, an inclination to charge forward in life, unafraid to get her hands dirty. When the children had time away from supervised chores and formal social obligations, they roamed the estate's vastness, turning it into their own private kingdom. While the Skakels were devout Catholics, meaning Mass on Sundays, and certain moral expectations, Ethel never felt stifled by tradition. Instead, she found a sense of belonging in the mixture of faith, family, and a father who could provide every material comfort. Her father, George, was a central figure in her life, commanding, successful, and determined to give his children a life that dwarfed his own upbringing. By all accounts, he was generous and forthright, yet also fiercely driven to see his children uphold the Catholic morals that guided him. Ethel's mother, Anne, balanced that with her own piety and focus on rearing a large brood. Ethel, as the 6th child, did not lack for companionship. Indeed, some of her siblings would remain close confidants for years, sharing recollections of those summers on the estate and the dinners that echoed with conversation from servants and guests. With all of the wealth swirling around them, however, there was an unspoken expectation that each child would someday do something to honor the family's name, whether that meant a good marriage, philanthropic involvement, or a public role. Ethel initially attended Greenwich Academy, a local institution where many children of the affluent studied reading, writing, arithmetic, and social graces. Teachers there likely found Ethel a bundle of energy, a student who did well enough but was more riveted by the prospect of an upcoming tennis match or a sailing excursion. Still, she dutifully followed the academic path set out by her parents and progressed toward finishing school. Her next stop was Manhattanville College in New York, a Catholic college known for shaping well-mannered, thoughtful women who could navigate high society. In the late 1940s, the winds of change began to swirl around her, though she had yet to realize that these breezes would carry her to one of the most famed families in American politics. While at Manhattanville, Ethel struck up a friendship with Jean Kennedy, a connection that, in hindsight, looks like the opening scene of a grand drama. The Kennedys were not yet the fully mythologized clan that they would become by the 1960s, but they were certainly on the rise. Joe Kennedy, patriarch of the family, had made waves in business, diplomacy, and early forays into politics. His sons were stepping forward, each with distinct ambitions. Meeting Jean was a gateway for Ethel into a new circle, one that bristled with political fervor, Catholic convictions, and the sense that they were on the cusp of monumental changes. In 1945, during one of those social gatherings arranged by Jean, Ethel found herself introduced to Jean's brother, Robert F. Bobby Kennedy. A moment that seemed casual, a handshake, an exchange of polite small talk, would become the hinge upon which Ethel's entire life pivoted. Bobby was only a few years older than Ethel. He had grown up as the seventh child of Joe and Rose Kennedy, within an atmosphere defined by fierce sibling rivalries, unwavering parental expectations, and a sense of destiny that pervaded everything they did. He'd gone to Harvard, served in the Navy, and was known for his intense, sometimes combative personality. Like Ethel, he was devoutly Catholic, though he also carried the Kennedy flair for debate, intellect, and a desire for service that echoed his father's example. At the time they met, he was still forging his path, no official roles in government, but harboring the seeds of a future that would see him transform from a supportive figure in his brother's campaigns to a powerful political force in his own right. For Ethel, meeting Bobby opened a door to conversation that felt natural, fueled by shared faith and the enjoyment of spirited banter. She was unafraid to challenge him verbally and push back on any perceived arrogance, qualities that Bobby found refreshing, particularly in the refined world he inhabited. Their attraction grew through small gatherings, weekend visits, and the teasing environment that the extended Kennedy brood cultivated. Over time, they realized their feelings were not just a fleeting romance. Ethel's father's wealth and her own connections didn't hurt, but it was her personality, fearless, vivacious, and ready to hold her ground, that solidified Bobby's interest. By June 17, 1950, only 5 years after their initial introduction, Ethel and Bobby exchanged vows in a grand wedding ceremony in Greenwich, Connecticut. The event was lavish, reflecting both families' affluence and also the swirl of excitement around the Kennedys in general. Ethel, radiant in her wedding dress, stood at the altar, ready to become part of a family that was rapidly ascending in the American political hierarchy. She was stepping into a new realm, one where her name would soon be recognized by millions, and where the responsibilities of being a political spouse would come to dominate her existence. Her father, George, and mother, Anne, watched proudly, perhaps silently marveling at the future that awaited their spirited daughter. As the new Mrs. Robert F. Kennedy, Ethel wasted no time immersing herself in the distinctive style of the Kennedy clan. Joe Kennedy was known to run the family somewhat like a political operation, with each son assigned roles and each daughter, or daughter-in-law, playing hostess or supporting spouse at key events. Ethel's own lively spirit harmonized well with this environment. She possessed the self-assurance to hold her own among charismatic personalities, offering wry comments or laughter that could diffuse tension when debates grew intense. She and Bobby moved in a circle that included not just politicians, but intellectuals, writers, foreign dignitaries, and, of course, a near-constant presence of family. The Kennedys were a famously large brood, and Ethel, from the start, matched their dynamic with her ability to connect with everyone in the room. The couple settled into a life that spanned Georgetown row houses and the Kennedy family compound in Hyannis Port, Massachusetts, places where Ethel's brand of hospitality would soon become legendary. The next milestone came in 1951 with the birth of their first child, Kathleen. She was the start of what would eventually be an 11-strong family. Over the next 17 years, Ethel gave birth to Joseph II, 1952, Robert Jr., 1954, David, 1955, Courtney, 1956, Michael, 1958, Carrie, 1959, Christopher, 1963, Max, 1965, Douglas, 1967, and Rory, 1968. Friends marveled at how Ethel kept up with each pregnancy while juggling her robust social life, philanthropic endeavors, and later the high-profile demands of her husband's political career. She seemed inexhaustible, a whirling dervish of motherly devotion, Catholic faith, and an unwavering commitment to supporting Bobby's ambitions. Meanwhile, Ethel's parents watched her transformation from an adventurous socialite into a senator's wife, someone who might appear in newspapers or on television, side by side with one of the nation's fastest rising politicians. Their own happiness, however, was short-lived. In 1955, George and Ann Skakel died in a plane crash on their way to California aboard a company aircraft, leaving behind a 27-year-old Ethel reeling from the shock. Though she had a large network of siblings, the loss of both parents in a sudden tragedy deeply affected her. At the funeral in Greenwich, she was described as distraught, leaning on Bobby's shoulder for support, tears streaming down her face in a rare public display of vulnerability. Now truly an orphan, Ethel relied even more on the Kennedys for emotional grounding. By the early 1960s, Bobby's political ascent accelerated in tandem with that of his brother, John F. Kennedy, who was elected President of the United States in 1960. Bobby became U.S. Attorney General in 1961, a post he held until 1964, and Ethel found herself at the center of Washington power. Public fascination with the Kennedys soared. JFK's youth and glamour turned politics into something akin to a cultural phenomenon. The entire family, including Ethel, was subject to relentless media coverage. She managed it with a characteristic blend of grace and irreverence, famous for hosting parties at Hickory Hill, their Virginia estate, that were lively, sometimes chaotic affairs. Kids ran around the lawn, playing ball or pranks, while Ethel chatted up Supreme Court justices, foreign diplomats, and civil rights leaders, never missing a beat. She had no qualms about letting her children roam or express themselves, believing that formality should not stifle the wonder of youth. The gatherings could become gloriously messy, leaving visitors with the memory of a sprawling, affectionate clan that was unafraid to relish life's joys. But then came the unthinkable. In November 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. The entire nation plunged into mourning, and the Kennedys experienced heartbreak on a level unimaginable for most families. Ethel, pregnant at the time, offered comfort to Bobby, who fell into despair at the loss of his beloved older brother. The tragedy drew him closer to his widowed sister-in-law, Jackie, as they tried to console each other and shoulder the enormous public expectations placed upon them. Rumors surfaced about the nature of that closeness. Some tabloids suggested an inappropriate relationship, but Ethel, stoic and confident, trusted Bobby. She never allowed gossip to mar her sense of loyalty. Instead, she stepped forward, showing up at memorials and press events, her eyes often brimming with tears, but her chin held high. Not long after JFK's death, Bobby resigned as Attorney General in 1964 and turned his sights on a Senate seat for New York. Ethel, unwavering in her support, assumed an even more public role, attending rallies, giving speeches on his behalf, and mobilizing the Catholic communities that resonated with their worldview. Rumors continued to swirl that Bobby had either an emotional entanglement with Jackie or, as some salacious whispers insisted, an affair with Marilyn Monroe during the early 1960s. Ethel seemed above it all, once telling a close friend that gossip was the pastime of idle minds. She put her faith in her husband, focusing on raising her children while encouraging Bobby to be his best self in politics. Ethel's unwavering commitment bore fruit in 1965 when Bobby won the New York Senate seat. Her public responsibilities multiplied. She hosted fundraisers, gave occasional public remarks, and supported Bobby's legislative interests, ranging from civil rights to anti-poverty efforts. Despite the swirling controversies from potential entanglements with Jackie to residual tabloid claims about Marilyn, Ethel's image remained that of the strong, devout wife, the anchor to a man who was catapulting toward a possible presidential run in 1968. Their synergy was palpable. He was intense, morally driven, sometimes moody. She was buoyant, quick-witted, and unafraid to challenge him. Together they radiated an energy that many supporters found irresistible. That sense of momentum built inexorably toward Bobby's 1968 campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination. Ethel took to the trail, 8 months pregnant, standing on platforms as Bobby delivered speeches to crowds enthralled by the dream of another Kennedy in the White House. The country itself was in turmoil, embroiled in the Vietnam War, shaken by civil unrest, and reeling from the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. only months earlier. Still, Ethel and Bobby believed fervently in the possibility of uniting Americans under a more compassionate vision of government. Then on June 5, 1968, the unthinkable happened again. In a Los Angeles hotel, moments after celebrating his victory in the California primary, Bobby was gunned down by Sirhan. The chaos was immediate. Ethel was at the Ambassador Hotel with him, her enormous belly hinting at the child soon to be born. Within hours, Bobby lay in critical condition, and America's heartbreak deepened. He died the next day, June 6th, plunging Ethel into widowhood at 40. She had 10 children already, the eldest 17, the youngest barely a toddler, and an 11th, Rory, was born posthumously just months later. The assassination shattered any illusion she might have had that the Kennedys were done with tragedy. JFK had been taken from them less than 5 years earlier, and now Bobby had suffered the same fate. For Ethel, the pain was nearly insurmountable, yet she had no choice but to carry on, guided by her Catholic faith and a determination to keep Bobby's memory alive. She donned black at his funeral, a stoic figure surrounded by her children, as the casket moved through mourners. A heartbroken nation looked at her face and wondered how anyone could endure such profound loss twice. In the aftermath, Ethel poured her grief into founding the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights. She launched initiatives around gun control, seeing both her husband and brother-in-law cut down by bullets. She also focused on poverty issues, especially as they intersected with civil rights. Speeches and interviews from that time reveal a woman channeling heartbreak into activism, even as she juggled the Herculean task of raising 11 children without her partner. The world recognized her strength. She became a symbolic guardian of the RFK legacy, determined to ensure that her husband's name would not fade. Behind the scenes, however, new traumas began to unfold within her own family. David, her 4th child, born in 1955, was especially affected by Bobby's assassination. Reports suggest he had witnessed parts of it on television. Over the years, he slid into substance abuse, heroin and cocaine, among other drugs, that he used to numb his pain. Ethel tried everything, from rehab facilities to private counseling, but addiction clung to David like a relentless shadow. The tabloids pounced, turning his struggles into front-page scandals. This overshadowed Ethel's philanthropic efforts, and she found herself having to defend or explain her children's difficulties to a press always eager for another tragic Kennedy storyline. Michael, her 6th child, faced controversies of his own in adulthood. though it would be some time before these were fully exposed. Ethel, in her typical style, kept the family gatherings afloat. She hosted them at Hyannis Port or at the large homestead, encouraging the siblings to form a supportive network. She believed strongly in the traditions that had once propelled her own childhood: faith, family dinners, shared laughter, and honest talk about life's challenges. In the mid-1970s, another scandal from her birth family's side erupted. Michael Skakel, a nephew from her Skakel lineage, unrelated to the Kennedys but part of Ethel's extended clan, became embroiled in the infamous Martha Moxley murder case. Martha, a 15-year-old neighbor, was found bludgeoned to death near the Skakel estate in 1975. Whispers circulated for decades about possible suspects, with suspicion falling on various Skakel boys. By 2002, Michael Skakel was tried and convicted. This put Ethel and her siblings uncomfortably under the spotlight again. Though she had no direct involvement in the case, the media's hunger for anything that could tie tragedy or crime to the Kennedys or their in-laws was insatiable. Ethel kept silent, not wishing to add more fuel to an already frenzied media circus. Her own heartbreak deepened in April 1984 when David, then battling a severe addiction, was found dead in a Palm Beach hotel. He had overdosed on a combination of cocaine, Demerol, and Mellaril. Accounts say Ethel herself discovered him, or was among the first on the scene, an unspeakably painful scenario for any parent. Once again, she arranged a funeral, wearing black, consoling other family members, and refusing to blame anyone publicly. She shouldered the loss as she had done with Bobby, turning her sorrow inward and focusing her energies on philanthropic initiatives. Over the years, her voice in the realm of social justice, gun reform, and other issues grew more pointed. She invoked David's struggles as a cautionary tale about the vulnerabilities even in prominent families. Just when the public might have hoped for a respite from tragedies linked to Ethel's brood, the late 1990s saw more heartbreak. Michael, her sixth child, was revealed to have had an affair with his children's teenage babysitter, Marissa Verocci. The scandal became tabloid fodder, overshadowing the sense of dignity Ethel had tried so hard to preserve. She was 69 by this time, and the heartbreak of seeing her son's marriage to Victoria Gifford unravel left her quietly dismayed. Yet in interviews, she minimized the drama, refusing to disown or publicly reprimand Michael. She believed in forgiveness, consistent with her Catholic teachings. Then on December 31st, 1997, calamity struck yet again. Michael was in Aspen, Colorado, participating in an impromptu game of football on skis, a boisterous tradition. He crashed into a tree and died instantly, leaving Ethel once more faced with planning a funeral under the glare of national media. She arrived in Aspen as medics were performing futile attempts at resuscitation. Another coffin, another eulogy. The same stoic composure that had carried her through Bobby's assassination and David's overdose became her shield once more. Even those who knew her intimately said that she must have carried an unspeakable well of grief behind that gentle, unwavering public face. Throughout these family calamities, Ethel continued to promote the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights. She would speak at gatherings about social justice, attend summits on civil rights or humanitarian efforts, and maintain friendships with prominent figures. She was often spotted at events standing tall among a new generation of Kennedys, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, embodying the continuity of a name that had endured so many losses. She extended her stoicism to the broader clan, reassuring them that they could remain a force for good despite each heartbreaking headline that depicted them as cursed. The wider Kennedy family also had its share of woes. Her brother-in-law, Ted Kennedy, once a towering figure in the Senate, wrestled with scandals such as Chappaquiddick in 1969 and his own health struggles later in life. Ethel, though not always center stage, was there at family gatherings, funerals, and birthdays, offering the same unwavering presence she had given to Bobby and her children. By 2009, when Ted died, she stood in black mourning attire once again, reflecting on how time had whittled away so many of the icons who once formed the core of that mighty family. A highlight came in 2014. President Barack Obama awarded Ethel the Presidential Medal of Freedom, honoring decades of public service and acknowledging her role in continuing the philanthropic and civil rights mission sparked by her husband. It was a poignant moment, reminiscent of how far she had come from her days as Ethel Skakel, the Greenwich tomboy turned political spouse. The ceremony included tributes to her activism in areas ranging from farm workers' rights to improving conditions in impoverished communities. She thanked the administration with humility, dedicating the recognition to Bobby's memory and the notion that each person can make a difference in the world. Despite a lifetime of heartbreak, from losing her parents early to witnessing the assassinations of her brother-in-law and husband, from burying 2 sons to navigating controversies around rumored affairs and children's missteps, Ethel displayed resilience that earned her the nickname the Stoic Widow of the Kennedys. Some marveled that she continued to uphold a steadfast Catholic devotion in a modern era where tragedies often erode faith. She remained unwavering in her positions, especially on gun control, stating in multiple interviews that if America had faced the heartbreak her family did, it would understand the urgency of reform. This moral stance resonated with many who believed that the Kennedys had paid a supremely high price for the nation's ongoing struggle with gun violence. By the early 2000s and 20s, Ethel had stepped back from public events, her advanced age making travel and rigorous schedules increasingly difficult. She was sometimes spotted at Hyannis Port gatherings, a grand matriarch among the younger Kennedys. She watched grandchildren and great-grandchildren step into the limelight, continuing the political tradition that she had once supported in Bobby and her other relatives. One such figure was Joe Kennedy III, who carried forward the family name in the House of Representatives. Ethel beamed proudly at his successes, reflecting on how the family's new generation tried to honor the values of public service she and Bobby once championed. Then on October 3rd, 2024, tragedy revisited. Ethel, at 96, suffered a severe stroke at her Hyannis Port residence. Household staff found her unresponsive, rushing her to a hospital in Boston. Family members, including nearly all of her living children and many grandchildren, converged on the city. Doctors attempted everything possible, but her condition deteriorated. Over the course of a week, the stroke's complications proved insurmountable. At last, on October 10th, 2024, Ethel Kennedy passed away surrounded by loved ones, ending a life that spanned almost a century and encapsulated triumphs, heartbreaks, and an unwavering faith. Joe Kennedy III delivered the official announcement telling reporters that Ethel was surrounded by love in her final moments. In that phrase, surrounded by love, one can almost see a mirror of those chaotic but joyful gatherings she once hosted at Hickory Hill, children running around, guests from political circles dropping by, the buzz of conversation, and Ethel at the center with an open heart. Even in her last days, that essence of community and devotion lingered. On October 16th, the family held a private funeral at Our Lady of Victory Church in Centerville, Massachusetts. Eulogies were delivered by grandchildren, including Joe III, and by her daughter, Carrie, who recounted stories of Ethel's humor, her boundless generosity, and her insistence that they never lose faith in humanity's capacity for good. The Mass concluded with a final farewell, after which Ethel's remains were carried to Arlington National Cemetery. There, she was laid to rest alongside Bobby, closing the circle on a love story that began so brightly at Manhattanville College and ended with a bullet's sharp crack in 1968. Now, even in death, they would be united at the iconic cemetery where so many Kennedys. Now, with her memory etched into American history, she passes into legend as the last lioness, the unstoppable figure who saw all, survived all, and kept the flame burning when so many others had gone. Her story reminds us that behind every monumental public persona lies a person shaped by family, faith, personal grief, and the courage to show up one more day. Ethel Kennedy did just that, across nearly 10 decades, leaving behind a living family legacy that will wrestle with her example for years to come. And if anyone wonders how she managed to endure, the answer likely resides in the unwavering Catholic convictions she nurtured from childhood, and the belief that even in the face of the darkest nights, there is always a dawn worth fighting for.